No more waiting. By the time you're listening to this, it will be Thursday. And if it's Thursday, that means there is NFL football on tonight. But tonight's game, the Chiefs and the Ravens, who cares? We got Bears football this weekend. And we've been waiting for this since football season ended last January. Who are the Titans? What do we see coming up in the rest of the season? Everything that we could possibly throw into one tight little podcast, Nick and I are going to walk through. All this and more on this episode of Bear With Us. What's going on, everybody, and welcome back to Bear With Us, a Chicago Bears podcast hosted by yours truly, Robert Schmitz, editor-in-chief of the Bears blog, right here alongside my co-host Nick Whalen of Football Guys, as we work to get you the best Bears podcast we possibly can. A podcast that can't seem to shut its mouth as we talk about film, we talk about analytics, we talk about takes, and everything in between. Nick, we finally did it. We're not talking about practice football. We're not talking about preseason football. We're not talking about pretend theoretical football. We are a few days away from talking about actual football that got played with jobs on the line, because that's the magic of what makes the NFL so fun. Man, it is literally like watching a playoff game every single time two teams step on the field. It's intoxicating. How you feeling?
Yeah, I'm just glad it's finally here. I mean, 'cause we got a taste with college football already having, whatever, 1.5 weeks, whatever you want to call that. And yeah, I mean, it's here. Honestly, it feels like I waited for it for so long, and now I feel like I'm almost not prepared, but I'm ready. I don't know. I'm in a weird state because I got my articles and stuff I have to do, and it's our first week of school. I work in a school, so
Mm-hmm.
I'm not as juiced up as I should be, but I'm sure by Sunday I'll be really pumped.
Well, for you and any other Bears fan that feels like you do, I'm going to try to put words to this feeling we all have, right? You ready for this?
Sure.
We have been talking about the 2024 season in some respects since September. And by that I mean last September. The moment the Chicago season started to go well and truly south last year, we had to start thinking about the future because you had this massive question about what is going to happen with Justin Fields
Yeah, no,
that
that's true.
felt like it was really hard to take your eye off of, even as the season rescued itself. Because then you had the Fields injury. Then you had the team win a little without him. Then you had him win as he came back. But you never quite got away from it because, Nick, by the time we should have given up on the Bears getting the number 1 overall pick, it started to look more and more realistic that Carolina would secure it. And
Right.
suddenly, by the time the chips actually fell, there was no chance that Carolina wasn't going to put themselves in position to draft a quarterback, which made the conversation about 2024, week 1, who's going to be the starter? Who's it going to be? How's this going to work? Dude, we've had this conversation for way too long.
Well, the Fields versus Caleb trading the pick, keeping the pick. I mean, it was like I feel like it was so much exhaustion and war back then, and now it's
Yeah.
just like, oh,
Because
okay,
because
easy.
here, even let's take this last week, Bears fan. I bet that you have talked with your buddies about much less than you talked about back during the Fields Caleb Williams real thick of it. That
Mhm.
was daily work days lost on Twitter. Like, those days were just intense, man. It was
Yeah.
like living every day took about a week's worth of conversation that you get right now.
Well,
And
Robert, do you remember when it was the start of free agency? Okay. And Bears fans were mad, so mad at Ryan Poles. They
yes,
didn't get Danielle Hunter. They didn't sign a receiver. What is he doing? They signed a running back right away, right? And then it was 3 days later they traded for Keenan Allen. Everyone's like, oh, okay. Then we get Rome. Then we get Caleb. Like, oh, okay. We played it back. But there was so much conversation now. Like there was so much to do. And now it's like there's like nothing to do.
oh yeah, and hey, Nick, I'm going to mention it one time here, and maybe it's a mistake that I'm going to put this on the podcast because
Uh-oh.
Christian, I love you. Like, I want you to know it happens to all of us. But I still remember moments where it was like friends of ours would suddenly end up in somebody's comments calling somebody an extremist for this, that, or the other. Like, I remember I was not trying to compliment Gardner Minshew, but I was like, I don't know, right now Gardner's probably a better overall quarterback, or at least maybe a more starting ready quarterback than Fields is at the moment. And it's Christian Williams, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
he lit me up, and then weeks later, the Raiders literally signed Minshew to start for them.
Right.
And a couple weeks after that, the Steelers trade for Fields. Dude, it's not like it's not like calling the tallest midget in the room is superstar analysis. It's more like things got ugly because in the middle
Yeah.
of all those Fields Williams conversations, instead of, hey, we could win a Super Bowl doing this, oh no, we could also win a Super Bowl doing this, the two good options thing you and I used to talk about, instead it was more focused on, no, that one's going to cataclysmically fail. This one's not going to fail. No, that one's going to cataclysmically fail.
Yeah.
We are so burned and scarred as Bears fans that I'm
What
not surprised it's hard to get excited, Nick. We are standing on the edge of what usually is the worst week of the year.
Yeah.
Can we say that part out loud?
Well, yeah,
Like,
because most time it's Green Bay. But the other part I think, Robert, is like I don't feel like this year is hopium. I feel like this year is just like, yeah, we should be pretty solid to good.
for once, we aren't convincing ourselves of something false. The best way to do this would be to count ifs, right?
Mhm.
What are the ifs that you and I are counting? Honestly, list a few. Do you need
Yeah.
examples?
If the offensive line can, stay healthy is probably
Okay,
a big one.
scale of 1 to 10. How likely is that?
I'll give it probably a 6. They stay healthy.
6. So, but most importantly, I'd say it's like above 5, right?
Mhm.
Caleb Williams looking not god awful, right? I'd say that that's about a 5, right? Like that's not me hating on Caleb, Nick. You
Mhm.
get this. Normally we say, well, Fields needs to take the next step. And
Yes.
that's an uncategorized way of saying we need Fields to become a top 10 quarterback.
Mhm.
And as the season drew on, it looked drastically less likely that that was going to happen. Maybe he could be an average starter by the end of the year, but a top 10 guy, I don't know. In
Mhm.
this case, like you're talking about, we need two of the Bears receivers, their big three, anyways, to stay healthy and play major roles. I'd say that that's an 8 likely. I
Yeah.
mean, we need the Bears secondary to play well. I'd say that's probably a 7.5 to 8 likely.
Mhm.
We need Javon Dexter to take us very solid step forward. That might be a 4.5. Like that one,
Sure.
we might be
Yeah.
stretching a little. But
Yep.
if the most we're stretching is taking a guy that can probably start, like at a Justin Jones level, and ask a little too much of him, we're in much better territory than we
Right.
have been saying DeMarcus Walker is going to solve our pass rush problems. And Matt Eberflus, who's never blitzed a day in his life, is going to scheme up pressures
Right.
left, right,
Well,
and center.
Well, go back a couple years, Robert, hoping Darnell Mooney's the wide receiver 1 and hoping get a wide receiver 2 or Kendall Wright. Like all of that stuff is not the hopium. Like it just feels realistic. Okay, this leans into this, Robert.
Mm-hmm.
We did this a long time ago, but the season is here. Let's just do some season-long predictions. Okay.
Yes.
I'm gonna give you the floor for win-loss total. If you want to go game by game, up to you, or if you just want to give a total, up to you. But how are the Bears going to finish 2024?
So last year, we did this same exercise.
Mhm.
And we did this exercise under the assumption they were going to beat Green Bay. I am always going to look back at that year, Nick, last year, and say, I think there was a part of us that all knew a year like last year was possible after
Mhm.
the training camp and preseason that we'd experienced. Because every one of us, whether you're a positive person or a negative person, hinged our season predictions on beating Green Bay.
Yep.
And the moment that that didn't happen, obviously you throughout all of it. And
Ugh.
the year kind of descended into a sad free fall. Hopefully we're not going through that again. And I
Mhm.
don't think we will. My head, when I look at this season, Nick, I really like to think I'm a grounded person. My head says, or my heart says 10-7. My
Mhm.
head says you probably got to take a win off that somewhere. But then my head also says all these losses that I'm booking could be wins. I mean, so to use an example, at Houston, this is not a foregone conclusion. I mean, and that doesn't take a monsoon like the 2022 Bears needed to beat San Francisco, Nick, against Trey Lance, who's quickly on his way to being out of the league. So a whole bunch of things all cobbled together. I'm more looking at Houston and I say, why are we so scared of the Texans? I understand CJ Stroud and those receivers are popping. I know Rashad Grenard and Will Anderson are on that team. So is Derek Stingley. Look, I'm not saying there's not a lot to like, Nick, but they're not the Ravens. They're the scrappy team that beat the Browns and then got smoked by the Ravens. They got a year better. They added Stephon Diggs, but didn't we see in the Super Bowl, in the AFC Championship game, that a good secondary can squeeze the life out of almost any unit in football? And it's not like the Texans ever had a good running game. Bobby Slowick, as a matter of fact, got lit up for leaning on a run game too much that was gaining just about nothing. So is it just that Houston is great for highlight packages? And that's not to say that they're a sizzle no steak team. They've definitely got steak. I think you're following what I'm saying, but it's more to say, Nick, that if Houston is the kind of team that we're counting as an automatic loss, I actually think our scars are showing, because the old Bears would definitely lose to Houston. The current Bears should not be favored, but it's the NFL. In the same way that I could cast doubt on traveling to Indianapolis, a team I think the Bears should beat, I can cast doubt that there's a set-in-stone result in Houston waiting for the Bears, or a set-in-stone result in London against the Jacksonville Jaguars, or that they can't split with the Packers. The way I can't help but look at this team, I see a team, and I'm never going to stop saying this, Nick, I see a team with way too easy a schedule not to inspire some excitement. If the Bears inspire some excitement, Ryan Poles has now made 2 trades at the deadline in a row, the leading trade at the deadline 2 years in a row. Why would he not do it this year? He has 2 second-round picks. So if I'm looking at the back half of the schedule, I see a different team than the Bears are at the early part of the schedule. One where the quarterback's got a little experience. One where Roma Dunze's got a little run in him. One that's got one more pass rusher somewhere along the defensive line than they do have now. And maybe that's a little bit of a loony bin projection. Again, we go back to the likelihood thing. If I'm betting on an extra pass rusher, that's probably a 3.5 out of 10. Right now, it's got some run to it. But if it doesn't happen, I'm just going to look like a fool. And that's okay. I accept that. But I look at Tennessee, and I think that the Bears can win this game. I'm going to refrain from saying the word should, because we don't know this Bears team yet. There are a lot of teams like the Niners, or maybe even the Chiefs, right, Nick? Where I think we can look at them and we can say, I know what this team should do, because they've got the same offensive coordinator. They've got the same defensive personnel. This is what they do on defense. They have success with it. This is who they're matched up against, and that should work. Instead, in Tennessee, we're talking about a first-year head coach rushing out a second-year quarterback with a whole hodgepodge of new personnel on that team, all new coaches, both sides of the ball, going up against a Bears team that added as many new coaches as they could possibly get their hands on, including a new defensive coordinator, including a new offensive coordinator, and new personnel to boot. This is the kind of game where you and I just have to truly guess about what are we actually going to see happen on the football field. And I like a lot of the Bears matchups, but I'm a Bears fan. Then I look through the rest of the schedule, Nick, and I see a trip to Indy that does not scare me as bad as I think it might scare others. I see I see Los Angeles visiting. And I've talked about this before. A September California team rarely plays well at noon, and that's currently where the Bears are slated to take on a Rams team that we're kind of forgetting doesn't have Aaron Donald anymore. I understand that the Rams have some solid personnel, but that's a massive loss that I feel like we're hand-waving away because we love Sean McVay and we finally remembered we like Matt Stafford, right? And so then we proceed. Carolina is utterly unterrifying. I think the trip to London favors the Bears more than meets the eye, because I think the Jags are, I'm trying to think of a decent metaphor. The Jags, I feel like, are chasing their own tail. Right, Nick? For every step they get better, I feel like they lose something else. They added Brian Thomas. I like Brian Thomas. They lost Calvin Ridley. So what did they gain, right? I mean, we could go back and forth, but it's more to say there's a step back for nearly every step forward they take, and they feel like a very limited team that could easily beat Chicago, But if Chicago's pass rush is working, especially with the rate at which they blitzed in the preseason, there's reason to think that they could rush Trevor Lawrence. And when you rush Trevor Lawrence, you can knock him off his rhythm. Then you go up against Jaden Daniels, and that's not an easy game because it's on the road. Same with the trip to Arizona. But the Bears should, operative word should, be the patently better team. And
Mhm.
so as I keep laying this out, I start to see more and more games where I say it's not a given they win, but they should win that one, and they should win that one.
Yeah.
And so if they lose one for every three that they should win, then you stack up a 7-2, 6-3 record, 5-4 at the worst, pretty quick. But even if they're 5-4, okay, the rest of the schedule is Green Bay, not easy. Minnesota, much easier. Detroit, not easy. San Francisco, not easy. Minnesota, much easier. Detroit, that one's at home. I think that's winnable. Then versus Seattle, let's not make them more than they are. They're still a team who's a mess on their offensive line and didn't make the playoffs. And I don't know about you, Nick. The scariest thing in the NFL, I think, sometimes is that people assume that when their offensive coordinator leaves and Pete Carroll's gone, that everything's just going to get better. I don't know why it's just supposed to get better in
Mhm.
Seattle. They just lost Pete Carroll and a very good offensive coordinator. And now we're hinging it all on Geno Smith. So there's opportunity there. Look, I could keep going. I really could, and talk about this schedule a lot. But it's more to say, Nick, I feel like even the 9-8 prediction that I just made
Mhm.
comes from the fact that most of the time Bears fans are a little over their own skis. But for once, the defense seems to be really peaking at the right time. I mean, every camp report has been that
Yeah.
the defense is awesome. And just when I should be scared of the offense, they roll up against the Bengals, a team with a good defense. And it's not the Bears reporters that are telling me about how good Caleb
Yeah.
Williams looked. It's
Cincy.
the Bengals guys because
Mhm.
they're out there trying to say, you're going to hear that we got smoked. Know that we got smoked by somebody good. They're making excuses for their own guys because they got ripped up
So,
by the Bears.
so Robert, you went with 9. Are you trying to talk yourself into 10?
I'm trying to tell you that I think my heart has a real shot at being right here. And I'm going to couch myself in this analytical 9-8, which is right on the other half of Vegas's 8.5 win total. It's the
Right.
smart prediction.
Which I've bet. So I'm hoping at least the 9.
It's the smart prediction. But I look at this schedule, dude, and barring catastrophe, which, knock on wood, one way or another,
Well, could happen
all
for
Caleb
anybody.
has to do is play league average football, and this team could be very testy from the
Right.
win-loss perspective.
All right. So I'll go a little more analytical. I believe Chicago's favored in 12 currently. I do agree with you. I think that a trade for likely a defender on the defensive line is likely middle of the year. So that could change things. And I do like that because they did have the easiest schedule for the first 9 or 10 weeks. And then when it gets tough, after the new pieces get to know each other, after Caleb gets used to the NFL, you add a little more D line. I mean, that makes the difficult games a lot easier. So I
We've
kind of
talked
put it into some tiers.
we've
So I put
talked
it as what do you got?
we've talked about this before, Nick, but I've noticed, and you have too, really good NFL teams have to be able to switch gears in the middle of the year. When you come out with one flat note like the Cowboys, the NFL will figure it out and then
Oh man,
dance with you very
they got
differently down the
exposed.
back stretch of the season. This is an annual problem for teams with one identity and only one,
Mhm.
which makes this season so intriguing for Chicago because the team in week 12 should be really different than the team in week 1
Mhm.
without any personnel ads. Like it's really weird, Nick, because I'm talking every positive green flag that I could think of. I'm like, well, can they pivot in the middle of the year? Yeah. They can
Yeah,
go from being a
they could.
defense first team to potentially, how dare I say, being an
Yeah.
offense first
Well,
team.
because they're deep. So I put it into 3 categories. I think they're favored in 12. I put it as should, right, win, and I have 7 games in that bucket. I've got 50-50. ish in 4 games, and then I have tough in 6 games. So if we look at it in terms of, let's say they lose 2 of the easy games, they should win because it's the NFL, man. Like I said, Arizona beat, I think, Dallas early last year, or Philly, and it was like, why did Arizona win this game without Kyler Murray? Like, NFL happens. So if we say 5 wins out of the should, we split 50-50. That's 2. We're at 7. We only win 2 of the 6 tough games because, again, NFL, right? That's 9. I'm going to lean into one more win because of potential trade that we
So,
talked about.
so you just said 9
And
head, 10 heart also. Like,
no, 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 no. This is where I'm leaning. I'm leaning because now I'm going analytics on you. Okay. So that was just me, like, just roughing it. So Mike Clay has the Bears schedule as 7th easiest. Warren Sharp has it as 5th easiest. And then if we enter in that trade potentially, that's going to get me over the hump to 10. So you're going 9 wins. I'm gonna go 10. The other thing too in here that's I've mapped this out, and we'll get into this more with the Tennessee matchup we'll talk about later. But you had mentioned Aaron Donald no longer in LA. Well, Ernest Jones got traded for peanuts when we're still not aware what happened there.
bag of
But
balls.
but a guy that's middle linebacker has to learn all the calls. And he just switched, and I think he just started practicing this week. So him trying to learn the calls and playing fast, because defense is all about playing fast. And if he's thinking and not playing fast, that's advantage Chicago in this. I would call Tennessee in some of that easier should win games. But then in a 50-50 game, which is where I have LA, that advantage Bears because you don't have to face Ernest Jones now. So they lost not only
Right.
Aaron Donald, but also Ernest Jones. So I think there's a lot of things that do favor. And the one thing I saw this week, which is something you've been pounding the table for, so I'm gonna give you credit on this. It actually came out. Albert Breer came out and said that Caleb Williams has been learning the offense since March. So if you want to say, hey, we're going to be cruising from week 1, not a slow start, you add that into this. I think all of that says 10 wins for me.
Plus, Nick, I mean, so I know I can always trust you with the analytical piece. It's part of why I try to come at it with, I guess, a different kind of analysis that is a little emotional driven. Nick, the other piece to this that I can't help but look at, we've got Carl Williams. Like, there's only one Twitter account. I'm sure you've seen it. It doesn't have a profile picture. It's named Carl Williams, but it only does one thing, and that's
Yeah.
talk
Oh,
about
yeah.
Caleb with pronouns indicating it might be his dad. And all this stuff that popped up because Miller Moss and the USC Trojans go out and win their early game, and they do it holding the, what is it, LSU? It was LSU, right? My
Yeah.
mind's not failing me.
Yep. Let's see.
They hold LSU to 20 points. Miller Moss runs the offense, throws 1,000,000,000 yards, and creates 27 points. And all of a sudden, I just can't help but think, Nick, Caleb Williams has talked about Mamba mentality. Caleb Williams has always talked about how, I mean, we know he's active on social media. It's not as if he's not reading some of this.
Mhm.
He mentions he's bookmarked some of the hate. Dude, Nick, I don't want to get out ahead of myself, but the Bears want to open the season with a statement. And that's not to say that Tennessee doesn't, but at the same time, Tennessee almost strikes me with the trade that they just made, for instance, as a team that thinks that it may take a couple weeks to get their feet fully
Right.
under them
With the new
before they
coach.
start rolling. New coaches on both sides of the ball.
Yep.
Like, everything's new. Will Levis is in a brand new offense. And worse, man. Did you hear Callahan talk today about play calling?
Well, hold on. Let's time out that one because we'll do the Titans preview here later. Okay. So a couple other fun things. So one is ESPN Seth, I think it's Walder, was very against the Montez Sweat trade even after they extended him. He works for ESPN. His simulation has Chicago 10-7 and winning a playoff game, which is nice. And another thing, if you want something other analytical, more of like unit based, this was a cool one I found today. Was Chicago was the best at defending middle of the field throws to receivers in the entire NFL. And that was with banged up Kyler Gordon, banged up Tremaine Edmonds, those two learning how to play together.
Was
in
that the
terms of
EPA per
Edwards
play
and Edmonds.
graph?
What? Yeah.
That was it. So for those who can picture this, okay, they had EPA per play on throws over the middle charted against how often did you allow a throw over the middle. And the two best defenses in football in this category were the Ravens and the Bears, who allow a lot of throws over the middle, but take the ball away enough that any positives you gain on those
Yes.
throws are negated by the amount of interceptions you created. And
Mhm.
I mean, it fits. I feel like, Nick, I feel like there are people that are frustrated with Tremaine Edmonds' contract, and they're so frustrated with this contract. I saw a take on Twitter that basically said some people ruined sports for themselves when they started to talk and act like GMs all the time. And with Tremaine Edmonds, I think that that's a perfect way to phrase this, where Edmonds is a very good coverage linebacker.
Mhm.
Yes, he gets picked on, but he takes up all kinds of space and
Yes.
can make plays and has access to plays and some coverage instincts that are really hard to find. Are they paying him too much? I am a massive hater about the
Mhm.
linebacker market.
Yep.
So you can find me squarely in your camp. But at the same time, you can't just clone TJ Edwards as much as we would love for Jack Sanborn to outright be that guy. And having linebackers with different skill sets, shocker, Nick, this is a good thing. And I can't believe I'm saying this because 2 to 3 years ago, I thought the Bears were way behind the times. I really did. Before you and I were talking about this, going back to a 4-3 defense that looks a lot like Lovey, I remember I went into, I think it was last season, basically saying, okay, Matt Eberflus, what are we here? Are we a retro future defense or are we basically just an antique defense? And it sure feels like with the way the NFL is twisting, Matt Eberflus is running a defense that other people are going to start copying soon. I mean,
Mhm.
cover three right now is getting killed. I'm sure
Yes.
you've seen it. You line
Mhm.
up in cover three right now, you're going to give up a throw over the middle. You're going to give up one of these McVay Shanahan's like big dig routes, like that basic that's
Mhm.
12, 15 yards depth every single time. It's really interesting looking
But
at
the
this
other
thing.
thing that the NFL did was they got super light. It's all about pass rush, and your
Mhm.
linebackers are basically safeties. And Dallas got absolutely torched by Buffalo. Everyone, Dallas was 29th in defensive success rate after Thanksgiving last year. So
That's
people were like, wow,
horrible.
Green Bay lit them up. Everyone lit them up, y'all, because they went super light. They had no one that could stop the run. And if you can't stop the run, what happens? Play action right behind them. Like it's like that because remember that's happened for years. Let's get these like Jamal Adams, which we'll talk about later. Get these safeties that can play linebacker, and this is going to be awesome. No, people can take advantage. That's why McVay went to duo and went right downhill at people last year because you have to have some beef in there, which Edmonds is big, which helps.
It,
So the one thing that's funny with that chart, Robert, I don't know if you saw this. The Bears were the only team that had a negative EPA
mhm.
if you threw over the middle of the field. So I was pretty pumped about it. But I want to switch to offense, okay? Because we got to keep
Let's do
this
it.
rolling. I have a number. Okay, so we're gonna go through y'all. We're gonna say kind of where we think the Bears offense is gonna be ranked. Caleb Williams yards, Swift rushing yards. We could go Caleb touchdowns too if you want to do that stuff. Who's going to lead the Bears in receiving yards broken down somewhat, etc. Okay, I'm going to start with this one because I'm ready. So if you want to be prepared, you want to go prices right $1. You can do that stuff too if you want, Robert. Okay, I'm going to go big. And again my money where my mouth is, y'all. I've bet the Caleb Williams passing yards over. I've bet the Bears record over. Okay, so I believe this as well. I am going to predict Caleb Williams throws for 4,300 yards this year. And a lot of that is, again, go back to analytics. Okay. They face the easiest pass defenses on average this year. And you look what happened last year. How did CG Stroud do it? They faced some easy pass defenses last year, but the Bears have better weapons, as we see. And again, Caleb, I'm not going to try to compare, but Caleb won the Heisman when CJ Stroud was still in college. So we know the talent level that he can do. And I got 4,300. If I go passing touchdowns, Robert, I'm going to predict 28 is my prediction.
That would be killer. If you push me to it, you're going to hear it. Both of us are very excited about this Bears team. I think Caleb has a real shot at throwing for 40,500 yards, is where my mind is at. Now, do you know if I said Quentin Crisco, also known as Butkus Stats, do you know the analyst I'm
Oh,
talking
oh,
about?
he's amazing. Yep.
He's awesome.
Yep. Hmm.
So, over the last couple of years, between 2022, 2023, and 2024, Quentin has unintentionally assembled a data profile of a year 2, a year 3, and now a year 1 quarterback's supporting cast and how it affects their production. And
Hmm.
guess what he found between 2022's year 2 study, 2023's year 3 study, and this year's rookie study? Guess what he found?
No, I'd love to hear it.
There is an inextricable link and a link that you cannot look away from between the talent of your wide receivers and your quarterback's production. That may
Mhm.
sound obvious, but we have heard for years, decades, all my football life, Nick, all good quarterbacks elevate their production. And that's true. But if you throw Humpty Dumpty in behind CD Lamb, Justin Jefferson, and prime Darren Waller, the stats say he's going to produce, at least if Humpty Dumpty can make an NFL roster in the first place,
Mhm.
right? So I can't help looking at this season and seeing, like you're talking about, easy three things. Number one, easy pass defenses on the schedule. Number two, really good receiving weapons on the Chicago Bears. But number three, most importantly, a running back that or a running game in Chicago that is prime to be overrated and very fallible. And if Shane Waldron loses faith in his running game, well, you
Yep.
got to get your production through the air.
Yep.
And the moment you start throwing the ball more, those passing totals that sounded ridiculous end up inflated because you're throwing. I mean, it's as simple as you're throwing the ball, right?
Yeah.
If
Yep.
you attempt 34 passes a game, you've got a much better shot at 4,000 yards than
Mhm.
if you're running the ball like they did with Justin Fields. And I say that not to be. I think Swift is a fine running back. I think that Tevin Jenkins and Braxton Jones look like a very firm left side of the line when it comes to run blocking. I also think, Nick, it is easy to forget the effect that Justin Fields had on the run box. And while I think Caleb Williams is electric as an athlete, I don't expect him to pull the ball as much as Justin Fields did. People
Right.
keep talking about how the Bears were one of the best rushing teams in the league last year, but they aren't separating out the fact that Fields was one of the best like yards per carry players in football for the last 2 years running. So it's not that I think that the Bears are going to suck on the ground. I think that Shane Waldron's use of power, outside zone, and inside zone should net them about a league average running game. But Nick, we've already seen in the preseason, situationally, this running game has a lot to be, or it's leaving a lot to be desired. And the
Mhm.
more the offensive coordinator sees the running game fail him, the more he's going to turn to little screens on the or on the boundary, little slant routes, or just outright passing combinations. All of those mean passing yards for Caleb Williams.
Mhm. Well, and dumping off to Swift, that's why you have him. You had
Mm-hmm.
terrible receiving EPA last year from your running backs. Now you can dump it off. So your prediction was 44,000.
40 50.
Okay, 40, 50. Okay. So just the numbers behind it, again, broken out over 17
And
games,
yes, that's
which
a
again,
franchise record. So we're both a
this,
little crazy.
well, yeah, yeah. But the big part of this is staying healthy, right? Because there's not a ton of starting quarterbacks every year that start 17 games. So to reach 4,000 would be 235 passing yards a game. To reach 4,300, which was mine, would be 253. So it's a little more obviously, but I don't think it's outrageous.
Gonna
The other
run
stat I think that's fun,
naked
Robert.
through gonna run naked through the Dallas streets if Caleb Williams averages 250 yards per game with what you said was basically 1.7 passing touchdowns per game too. Was
Mhm.
that only passing? Or do you have another 4 rushing touchdowns tacked on there too?
Well, I assume he's going to have them. Yeah, let's look what that is. So that would be 1.6 is to reach 28. Now, Robert, don't put stuff out there that you're going to do something because we just saw the Florida State guy say that he was going to eat something out of a red Solo cup if they lost to Boston
I have
College.
no shame. I would do this. If he
He had to
throws
delete his account. That happened. No, I was going to say this one, Robert. So there was a stat. I'm sure you've seen the last 13 first overall pick quarterbacks that started week one have all lost. Y'all, how many of them were traded for that first overall pick? Not many. So that's a stat I think that I'm just dismissing. I don't think that has any relevance here
it's
because
funny.
one, as we talked about, Caleb's loaded with team around him, and this team had 7 wins last year, not Carolina, who had like what 4.
You phrased it funky. I only pick on it because it's funny, right? You said how many of those players were traded for? A lot. That was part of the problem. Like a lot of those players were Bryce
What?
Young. A
You know what I
lot of
mean?
those
Earn the
players.
pick.
Right, exactly. It's this gift aspect of the Bears. I mean, so that stat that you mentioned, for those who didn't hear it, first overall picks are 0, 14, and 1 in their debut. But also, all 15 of those started for the team that actually earned the number one overall pick. You
Mhm.
have to keep reminding yourself the Bears drafted ninth. And so effectively, the Bears are the Mahomes Chiefs, which immediately went on a rampage with Alex Smith the preceding year to the point where they didn't need to bring in Pat Mahomes, or
Mhm.
Buffalo, who drafted Josh Allen at what was it, 10 after trading up for him,
No,
or
he
it was
was like
8,
he was
wasn't
like
it?
7 or so.
It was like,
6
yeah,
or
it was
7.
like 7 or 8. But so they drafted him, and within I think a year or two, they squeezed on into the playoffs, despite the fact that Josh hadn't fully ascended yet. I mean, all this to say, Nick, that I'm right there with you, and I'm trying to back up the point that
Yeah.
a lot of historical comparisons don't fit with Caleb. It's not to say that it's automatically the thing we should assume that Caleb's going to dominate. It's more to say that if you take a look at every other number one overall pick throughout history, it took them until at least year two to get the team that Caleb has around him right
Yes.
now. It's
Mhm.
what makes for very unusual and weird statistical questions, Nick. Like, I'm going to go ahead and ask it. Did these players actually get better between year one and year two? In many cases, yeah, but so did their cast. So,
Mhm.
how much of that year two step that we're always looking for is just the fact that Trevor Lawrence got away from, oh gosh, um, I'm struggling to remember Urban Meyer and a horrible Jags team. How much of like
Oh,
how much of
man.
Jared Goff's ascension is the fact that he got away from Jeff Fisher and they
Yes.
added a bunch of sicko receivers to the
Yep.
roster? It's all interlinked. Shocker, you put Derek Carr with Darren Waller, he throws for 4,000 yards. You give
Mhm.
Derek Carr nobody to throw to, it falls immediately.
Yep.
Wow, did Derek get worse? No, it's a team game,
Yep.
right? And
So so
yeah.
speaking of the guys around him, okay, and again, I know you got to cut off here in 20 minutes, so we're gonna try and cruise through this. I'm gonna say DeAndre Swift in terms of just a rushing yardage total, okay, that we can
Mhm.
go through this. I've met 850 because I think they are gonna split that up. I think that, as much as they were gushing over Velus Jones in Hard Knocks, he's gonna get some carries. Roshan, who's banged up a little bit, we'll talk about that later. And Khalil, they're all gonna get some play. And I think Swift is gonna be the main pass catching back. But I only have him as 850 for rushing yardage. What do you have, Robert?
I learned the hard way in my Jordan Love breakdown that you can make a great video and ruin it on yardage predictions because they're just so messy. I
Yeah.
like your 850. I don't
Okay.
think he's going to be much more than that.
Okay.
Also because I have him at I really think the Bears are going to run the ball less than meets the
Yeah.
eye. Dude, if
Yeah.
they like Caleb the way that they sound like they like Caleb, let's put it this way, Nick. Simple question, Bears fan. You get to call the plays. So let me ask you a couple guiding questions. Nick, who are your three best players on offense?
Yeah, exactly. Caleb, Moore, and Keenan.
I'm going to tell you, you're not even allowed to say Caleb. So who's your third best after that?
I would say Tevin Jenkins.
I think it could be Tevin. I think you could make the argument for Cole. I think you could make the argument for Swift. So, but best case scenario, your first two options are receivers. So, what
Yep.
do you do when your first two options are
Right.
receivers? You call passing plays.
Hmm.
I
Yeah.
know it feels like it's normal. Rookie quarterback, let's run the ball. I will be
No.
surprised if the Bears aren't going to end up. What do you think? This one, it's a true surprise. I bet they end up 58-42 pass run balance around at the end of the year. I will be a lot of horizontal stuff, a lot of what do you call it? Extension of the run game stuff. But I bet you they end up throwing quite a bit more than they pass, or
Yeah.
throwing more than they run.
Yeah. I mean, I think easily. Yeah, it's at least gonna be 100 more pass attempts than rush attempts. So maybe, yeah, if you go 150 more, sure.
Which means 850 yards for Swift. I really think that's bang
Yeah.
on.
All right. How about this then? Who's leading the Bears in receiving yards, Robert?
I think it has to be more until otherwise specified
Right.
because Keenan may outcatch DJ Moore, but
Hmm.
DJ's got so much explosive potential that I will be surprised if DJ doesn't rip off about a 65 to 80 yards a game and end up with a very healthy 1100 1,200 yard total.
Okay. Well, that's the next question. So broken up. So you have 1,100 to 1,200 for DJ. What are you going to give Keenan?
Probably 800. I think Keenan takes a step back in part because he's not the true number one anymore. And
Mhm.
so I think he just gets less targets. And so he's more situational, still a very healthy receiving a season for him, but a step backwards in terms of role and a step backwards in terms of production that goes with it.
All right. What about Rome?
I bet you Rome also gets like 750. I mean, he might. The hot take that's been building up inside of myself, Nick, is I can't scratch or I can't get away from the idea that Rome may displace Keenan by the end of the
Right.
year.
Right. Yeah,
Where
you said that. Yeah.
and so if he does, then Rome could rip off some games close to 100 yards in that backstretch. And gosh, Nick, I know how excited you'd already be. Can you imagine looking your dumb little high schoolers in Wisconsin in the eyes at like the week after Roma Dunze goes for 130 and 2 scores,
Yep.
like along with Caleb Williams?
Well, he's polished too. That's the thing. It's not like you got a polished guy who led the entire FBS in receiving yards. So I'll quickly go through those with you. I have DJ as leading as well. I think that makes sense because also when you look at the two tight end sets, it's going to be Rome and it's going to be Keenan out or DJ out there. I don't think that Keenan will be out there as much, especially now he has a heel injury that he was limited in
I
practice
think
with.
it'll be
So
Keenan
we'll talk about
early.
that.
I really think it'll be Keenan
Well,
early, and then it'll transition to Rome.
I I think there's a chance Rome could outsnap him this year. But anyways, so I have DJ at 1050 for receiving
Mhm.
yards. And then I have Keenan at 925 because I think Keenan's going
Smart.
to be the guy they lean on a lot, third downs, especially early in the year. And then if Rome has the second half of the year, like you're talking about, I could see that too. But I can't help but think about we're chasing the three 1,000-yard receivers and how cool it would be, but we don't quite get there. So Keenan gets to 925, and I have Rome at 900.
If you
Again,
go
I have more yards than you have, so I have to stretch it out a little bit more.
and I learned the hard way last year again with Jordan Love's yardage projection, which I really put a
Mhm.
lot of thought into. But so I realize how much those guys that you never would have thought of end up making
Yep.
like they blow up your yardage. Where, for
Yeah.
instance, what do you have for Cole Kmet?
I have 500.
500 is where I land too. And I've
Yep.
heard a lot of fans that think he'll do less than that because of the weapons. And I'm like, I don't
Okay.
know. Cole kind of gets his. Like,
Well, it depends on Gerald Everett, I think, a lot. How
I,
much he'll cut in.
part of me keeps looking at Everett's usage in the preseason, grain of salt, and
Yep.
thinks that he's almost like a hybrid receiver. I understand that this is literally speaking what the U tight end is, but
Right.
the routes he's running feel like receiver routes. And so if Cole gets the majority of the tight end routes, the main thing I think of is a lot of tight ends attack areas on the field that defenses will deliberately leave open because they're not
Yes.
scared of the
It,
tight
it's
end.
a
Just
check down.
exactly. And
Yep.
the tight end's not going to rip them open. And so
Mhm.
it's not as if it reminds me of how, for any Bears fan who's curious, Darnell Mooney got less targets last year than Roshan Johnson. I mean, sometimes being in the
Mhm.
right spot of the field is just going to get you enough touches that
Right.
you amass a very healthy, productive season.
Mhm.
And I bet you Cole does that more. Plus, at least based on the way he played in the preseason, I think Cole's forgotten man thing may really pop this year because there's a lot of other guys on that defense to pay attention to. And if
Right.
85 just imagine, man, Nick, now I'm getting excited. Imagine a play action play where Cole cuts across the field on a sift block on something that's deliberately designed to look like split flow outside zone, right?
Mhm.
And so then Caleb hits a big ball fake and steps back and looks to his right while Cole just wheels out to the left.
Yeah.
And the whole defense hard flows over with the running back. And you get like, oh man, I've seen it before on like when they run
Mhm.
Y leak, where you get that nickel corner, or sometimes it's the safety that's in like cover three or he bit down on the run fake. And you get that moment where he just like falls over himself trying to catch the tight end that just
Yep.
whizzed right by him.
Or or
Man,
or they'll get picked.
or they get picked.
Yeah,
It's
and you see them trip over each other. Yeah. So I overall ranking, and I think this
mhm.
is, I mean, you could say points or yards, but I think overall ranking, I have Chicago ninth in offense. What's your prediction?
I would have to study it. And that's not me trying to back off. I think
Mhm.
that the Bears offense is going to be inconsistent early, but I also think that they're going to be explosive. Like when I say inconsistent, I mean I think that their rookie hallmarks and their youth is going to be shown in the ability to pick up specific downs. But Nick, I don't think this is an offense that's going to lack chunks. They're just not built that way, right?
Yep. Yep.
And so what does that mean? I mean, I think somewhere in the 14th range makes too much sense. It's actually not that hard to be an average offense when you have this kind of weaponry. But also, if Caleb figures it out, let me put it this way, Nick. To me, if they're going to end up ninth, it's because they're going to start the year 14th and then they're going to play top five ball in the back 6, 7 weeks of the season. And
Yep.
if that happens and they end ninth, again, we're very close to streaking through the streets because that's a realistic outcome, but it would be so exciting and
Mhm.
hasn't happened in Chicago for an
Right.
awfully long time. So
Yeah.
I'll stick with like 12th where they start 16th-ish and they end 10th-ish just to guard my own heart.
Yeah.
But
Well
if they start
well,
falling, woohoo, watch
this
out.
makes sense because you're I have about 300 more passing yards than you, so that makes a lot of sense. You know what's interesting? We're talking about this scarring. I don't know if you follow Deontay Lee. I think he's a good dude.
Mhm.
At the Ringer, he writes at the Athletic, but he said that Bears fans are scarred, but he's like the other people that are watching this, they're not scarred, so they can kind of see it for more for what it is. And I feel like they might almost be more excited than Bears fans are, which is kind of funny. But we're going to transition to I would say also exciting part of the team, which is the defense.
How is this
So
not exciting?
right,
Dude,
right.
this
You know, one
mhm.
thing I was disappointed in Hard Knocks, 2 things. One is Montez Sweat was just like not even shown, interviewed, talked about much. The other one was a little bit shocking to me. I didn't see Thomas Brown much at all in terms of coaching. I know he's passing game coordinator, so I just don't know how much involved he's going to be. But that leads me into this, Robert. Leading Chicago in sacks, I have Sweat, and I'm gonna say 11. Well, how about you? What do you think? Who's the who? Well, who leads the team in sacks? Now, how many are you gonna go with?
I think it's going to be Sweat. I think he ends up with 9.5 sacks because I think Sweat ends up commanding enough double teams that Sweat's effect starts to free up other people's rush
Yep.
and Sweat gets less free sacks. Look, I'll be honest, it would just be really stupid, I think. I've done this before, Nick, where I'm assuming that teams are not silly enough to let DJ Moore in week 17 of a season that you actually might get fired if you don't perform in. You're not, there's no way Atlanta is just going to let DJ Moore line up in the slot in
So
man
dumb,
coverage all game long, right?
dumb.
Surely they won't. Surely they won't. And then they did. So
Yeah.
surely teams aren't just going to let Sweat eat out there on the right hand side and just unfettered forever. And what we saw last year is that Sweat's a very good player, but he got most of his production when he was up against like Cleveland's third best offensive tackle and Detroit's second best offensive tackle backups. So I'm not hating on Sweat. I think Sweat's a very good player, but where I think his production would really have a chance to pop is if you do get that second pass rusher. We're on the same page though, where
Right.
I think
Yeah.
he's going to do a great job of squeezing the pocket and forcing the ball out.
Yeah. No, I think 9.5 is a way better number to go with. I'm gonna go with 11, and this is a little bit of me, my projecting. So this is if you have the ninth best offense, Robert. So
Hmm.
you picked 9.5 with the 12th to 14th ish offense,
Hmm.
right? So, but if you're the ninth best offense, you're leading in games, which means the offense you're facing is going to be throwing a lot more. So to me, I think part of that is there's going to be more pass attempts for him to go and pin his ears back and go after it. So that might be a little bit of the difference. How about this? I'll let you start this one. Who leads the team in interceptions this year?
It's so funny, right? Revis never had all that many interceptions
No.
because he just didn't get thrown out all that often.
Yep.
And in my opinion, after the season that he had, I've seen this where a lot of teams don't scout week to week film like I keep thinking they do. Where I'll go into a team, this is going to sound really arrogant, Bears fans. Nick, this is going to sound really arrogant, but I will go into a game against an opponent with a better understanding of how the Bears play than some opposing coaches. And it becomes really clear that they didn't watch enough games. Whereas me reviewing the film every single week, has a very good understanding of what the Bears are going to do and how they line up in certain situations. That's more me saying, Nick, that when I look at who's going to lead the team in interceptions, a lot of that stuff changes after the season when teams finally have the chance to sit down and watch as
Yeah.
much film as they can over months. So let me ask you this. Before I answer the question, are teams going to throw at Jalen?
No, and that's what affected my answer. I went with Stevenson because
I
I
think
think
it's going
that's
to
what's
be
going to happen.
Edwards.
Okay.
TJ Edwards has been a fiend. And I agree with you that Stevenson should be the guy, but the Bears corners have hands made of stone. And so I
Mhm.
wouldn't be surprised if this is going to be more throws that get squeezed over the middle. And TJ Edwards has a nose for this, man. Like, he
Well,
can
you could go
smell.
Edmonds too, to be fair.
I could, and Edmonds seems like he gets a lot of the tipped balls, but where Edwards has been hunting is that short check down that should be free, and he picked off an awful lot of them. And so it
Oh,
wouldn't
should have
surprise
had
me if
more.
that continues, where basically, Nick, if the best way to put this is Eberflus's defense is designed. It is designed to push an offense towards attacking the middle of the field. So if that's where the Bears are pushing the ball, then you got two hunters there. And I think I'm picking the one that I believe is more instinctive in those areas. It's not taken away from Edmonds. Edmonds, I think, does a better job of denying throws, whereas Edwards, the throw happens and he gets in the way of it.
So I thought of the linebackers. My second guess
Tyler.
was Kevin Byard.
Oh, that'd be dope.
Kevin Byard, y'all, like again, like top 10 safety every year, except for like last year, forever. He has 4 or more interceptions in, let me count here, 5 of the last 7 years. Um, and if you're winning games, like we're projecting, right, more than last year, and if your offense is doing well, people got to throw. And that's when overthrows happen and things get tipped and guys get hit. And who benefits the most? Linebackers and free safety. So if those linebackers aren't going to do it, Robert, Byard was my second guess, but that's not a bad one at all. Where
Mm-mm.
do you think the defense is going to be ranked?
So I've seen a lot of people that think the Bears defense is going to be a lot closer to average than they are top 5. And
Mm.
I think the answer is truly in the middle, where I think that they're going to end up being the 10th or the ninth best defense, health permitting, in football. I think Brisker, I have tanked a lot on Brisker, man. I have
Yep, me too.
really, really hated on Brisker's total inability to play the deep third. But
Mm.
he is like adding a linebacker in the run box and helps one-dimensionalize a lot of teams that, dude, I don't know if you feel this way, but man, if you can make Will Levis beat you, I feel great. And there's way
Yes.
too many teams on the early part of the schedule that are just, I mean, they're kind of like that, where it's like,
Well,
yeah,
so Roquan Smith actually made this comment about the game that's going to be tonight. So if you guys listen to this, we're recording on Wednesday, but you'll listen to it on Thursday. Is he says, yeah, we want to stop the run game to make them one dimensional. People are like, oh, what? You want Patrick Mahomes to pass all the time? No, it's about play calls. That way you can rush the passer without worrying about the run game. And it dictates so many other things. So to me, making it one dimensional, I think helps your defensive calls and makes your defense faster to react to the pass.
and that's the thing I think got really quietly missed by a lot of Bears fans was how good Chicago was at crushing an opponent run game. So
Mhm.
kudos to TJ, kudos to Andrew Billings. We need Javon Dexter and Jaquan Brisker to just keep doing what they've been doing, because
Right.
if you can stop the opponent run game, even CJ Stroud, man, I'm not going to tell you that I love the matchup between Stroud and these corners and these receivers and this defense, but if you take the run game away, well, at least it's a sparring match at that point.
Mhm.
And then it's
Mhm.
all about what Chicago does on offense. But we got a game to talk about, don't we?
So real quick, I'll give my
Mm-hmm.
ranking and we'll get into the game. And y'all, we don't compare notes. Okay. To be fair, we don't compare notes.
Did we
This
just
this
do
is
it?
this is all off the cuff. I have Chicago's defense ninth. I have their offense and defense the same ranking because I had it close, but I was like, this will be more fun. So I have them both ninth.
Nick,
Okay.
I'm going to say something that I need to say because you're thinking it, I'm thinking it. Bears fans, strap in. Strap in. If Nick is right and the Bears hit the playoffs playing top 5, top 10 offensive ball and top 10 defensive ball, This is a dark horse Super Bowl candidate. That's not to say it's definitely going to happen. It's to say that, Nick, there are a lot of teams that limp into the playoffs. There are a lot of
Mm,
teams that were never doubters in the playoffs. But that team, like the Buccaneers, like the Lions, they're the ones who get in playing balanced ball on both
yep.
sides. You add a kick ass punter to the mix. Yes, I'm shoehorning Tory in there. And you play 60 minutes of football. And who
I'm,
knows what happened? And if it was a 7 game series, maybe you wouldn't beat the Cowboys all 4 games. If it was a 7 game series, maybe you have no chance against beating the 49ers, but it's not. It's
right.
4 quarters of
Hmm.
15 minutes. And
Yep.
Nick, I hope you're right, because if they get to the end of the season playing that kind of football, then who really knows what the
Mhm.
ceiling is? I just love that we get to talk about it.
Well, yeah, I mean, and to me, I think it's a testament to the depth of the team. Everyone, I mean, again, this isn't just Chicago fans. This is everyone predicts them to make the playoffs. That's like the odds right now. So this isn't hopium. Okay, transitioning into week one, we're gonna have to cruise through this. Robert's got more of a cutoff than I do. Chicago's favored by 4. Point total is 45. So it's a home game, in Chicago. Let's talk through the injury report. I think that is very crucial here. Keenan was limited. Well, these 6 were limited today in practice. Keenan with a heel, Montez Sweat with a toe, Zach Pickens with a groin. I don't think Zach's going to play, but him being limited, I think that's a bonus. Ryan Bates was limited with the shoulder. That's promising. Roshan with the toe. I don't know if that's going to stop him from dressing, considering Bayless can also do special teams. And Kron Amagaji was a quad. On Tennessee's end, do not practice or did not practice. Jamal Adams with the hip. He's missed most of camp with the general soreness. He said he feels like he's getting close. Not practicing on a Wednesday at all is not good for his odds. Although the way Jamal Adams has played the last few years, I wouldn't mind if he actually plays in the game. DeAndre Hopkins had his first practice since July with his knee, but he was limited. And Otis Reese is more of like a special teams backer, but he's not bad as a backup. He was limited with a concussion. 2 guys, surprisingly, that did practice was L'Jarius Sneed and Wouzier, the corner. So both of them. So in terms of Sneed, Sneed's had a um, uh, issue with his knee. That's been something that's been going on again, off again. They've kind of had um, uh, like a plan, right, to bring him along slowly. He's had it drain some as well, recurring soreness, but he practiced in full, so that's good odds for him to play. And then Wouzier missed most of camp with a calf, multiple weeks, and they've had him as a slow go and building him up. So at least they build him up, I guess, in a good way that they're actually both going to play against Chicago.
Yeah, I feel like it's gonna be both rosters going toe to toe. It's week one. I mean, Tevin Jenkins isn't on the or on the injury report, but like you're saying, I mean, DeAndre Hopkins, L'Jarius Sneed, many of the others that you mentioned. I'm not really thinking that Chicago's going to catch a break and just miss most of the Tennessee Titans. This is a big game for everybody involved. And I would imagine that we're going to see everybody strap up and find a way to put the pads on and collect their game checks.
Well,
So
I gotta feel though with Hopkins, this is his first practice. You're not going to get full Hopkins on Sunday, even if he's healthy. Is he in shape? Does he have rapport with the offense? Again, new offense, Robert, and with Levis. Like, to me, it just doesn't, I think, spell that he's going to be at the peak of his powers, which again, y'all, let's talk about DeAndre Hopkins. He's 32. Okay. Guess who else is 32 and limited on the injury report? Keenan Allen. And people are like, oh, he's over the hill. No one's talking about DeAndre Hopkins, maybe taking a step back. He's been injured multiple times throughout the year. So to me, I think that's something to kind of keep in mind that if you don't get a full DeAndre Hopkins, Robert, and you're already favored by 4, I think that really helps in terms of Chicago maybe gaining another point or 2 advantage here.
I think it helps a lot. I mean, I don't want to make light of the situation, Nick, because I look at DeAndre Hopkins, I look at L'Jarius Sneed, I look at Tony Pollard, I look at Calvin Ridley. There are so many matchups that we could talk about in this game. I feel like a casual. I keep coming back to Will Levis. where I keep looking at this offense under Brian Callahan and the fact that going back to what we talked about earlier in the show, you didn't let me finish this. Brian
Mm.
Callahan specifically talked about how, well, you look at EPA per play, and if you're going to run the ball, you got to make sure you're running it against the right looks because passing is almost always a higher EPA per play call than running the ball is. So, and you look at Callahan's background with the Bengals, dude, they only throw the ball. Like, trying to turn Will Levis into Joe Burrow sounds like a massive ask. And so this is the time where if an offense is going to patently fall on its face, like if an offense came into the season delusional, you find out week 1. And
Oh
the
yeah.
Bears defense just feels to me like the wrong defense to trot that kind of a game plan out against, but who knows? All of Tennessee to me, Nick, feels like they're typified by their offensive line. You look at their offensive line, you see center Lloyd Cushenberry, left guard Peter Skaranzi, left tackle. Oh my goodness, what's the kid from
JC
Bama's
Latham.
name?
I had to
J.C.
face him
Latham.
when he's a freshman in high school. It was
D-
not fun.
dude, not easy. Those three, phenomenal, right? That's a very good offensive line. But the
Hold on,
but the
hold on.
two
Let
on
me
the
stop you.
right, but the two on the right leave so much to be desired that I can't help seeing this Tennessee team, Nick, as just such a patchwork. Whereas the Bears, to me, are a congealed unit, both on defense, and yeah, the offense isn't literally congealed yet, but you could argue the offense is so loaded with talent that while they're not set, they're going to just spark during games. I don't know. Maybe we're just high on the Bears.
So, well, I don't think we are because if we take again, I like PFF. I'll reference Mike Clay as well for ESPN here. So PFF has Tennessee's overall rank in terms of talent 29th, Chicago's 18th. Defense, Chicago's 11th, Tennessee's 22nd. Offensive line, they have Tennessee as 30th, Chicago as 11th. You had talked about Lloyd Cushenberry. I mean, he's coming off a career year. Before that, he was lower third in terms of center. Skoronski, we loved him, right? Northwestern. He was the 29th best guard last year. Now, he could get better. I get that. Is that going to happen week 1? We'll see. Latham is a right tackle playing left tackle. The right guard played tackle last year, was a 41st best tackle, moving to a new position. Their right tackle has been downright terrible. So if you can't protect, as you're talking about, Robert, and you have a new offense you're installing, which Tyler Boyd knows, but Tyler Boyd was the 91st best receiver last year. He's your slot now. And you bring in Ridley, who was okay last year, and Hopkins, who's banged up. I actually like the running backs the most, Robert. I like Tony Pollard. I like Tajay Spears, but Chicago typically stops the run well. So to me, I think if this offense is going to get going in Tennessee, they're going to have to hit some shots, and some bad things are going to have to happen deep. And I think they're going to have to use those running backs, whether it's checkdowns, whether it's running the ball, and Dexter doesn't start the season off well. Something like that, I think, has to happen for them, I think, to do super well offensively.
You're nailing something about Tennessee that I think is so critical to talk about. Tennessee's name recognition is off the charts. I mean,
Mm.
L'Jarius Sneed, I know that guy. Calvin Ridley, I know that guy. Tyler Boyd, I know that guy. DeAndre Hopkins, I know that guy. Tony Pollard, etc., etc., etc. Jeffrey Simmons, I can't remember the linebacker from Los Angeles' name.
Ernest
Arden,
Jones.
Arden Key, Harold Landry. Like, you've got a bunch of guys in Tennessee that chances are, Bears fan, you have heard their names before, but you heard them 2 years ago. Calvin
Yes.
Ridley, I think, is my favorite example, Nick, of he's not bad. He's definitively good, but is he very good? No, I think it's 2 steps forward, 1 step back across this roster.
Yep.
Tyler Boyd, for instance, picked up a ton of production, but his best years were close to 3 years ago, man. I mean,
Yep.
that's all I test on my side, but I don't think Boyd has been near the factor over the last couple years that he was when he had a better role in the Bengals system. So it's good that Callahan was able to pull him over. I mean, you got a guy that you can use, right? But I don't know. I keep seeing Tennessee as a team with a lot more questions about what they're even trying to do. With the Bears, you kind of know. I mean, the Bears don't need to make any bones about not trying to throw the football or run the football. They have a guy who just caught for 12,000 yards last year. They had another guy who caught for 1,300 yards last year. And if you want to hate on one of those, which you got all realm to do, they just drafted somebody number 9
Right.
overall who, according to some guys, I'll use Jacob Infante as an example, but I think Brugler said the same thing, a guy who would have been wide receiver 1 in multiple drafts over the last 5 or 6 drafts.
Mhm.
So I don't know, Nick. I just find myself looking at this team or this game, and I don't love the matchup, offensive line on Tennessee's defensive line. I do love the matchup of Chicago's secondary. Let's transition there. I mean, I know you've got a couple of rankings you want to run through, but is there
Sure.
a matchup that you love more than the Bears corners on the Titans receivers?
No, I do because the Titans receivers don't get separation, y'all. That's the other thing. So if you're looking at something where you're like, oh man, they could really take advantage of is they just don't separate super well. And if there's anything that you learned about Jalen Johnson last year and this preseason is he is sticky. So to me, I think that could be where you're looking at turnovers. I know I'd said this, I think last episode, Robert, but I think that Will Levis turns the ball over twice. That's part of the reason. I think that it could be also a strip sack, late in the game or something like that as well. But I think that's something to kind of look at. If we look at in terms of their defense, Robert, I know you had talked about it, and one guy we hear about all the time. Robert's talked about him, I think, where to the point where I think Robert might have nightmares of Jeffrey Simmons. He's just concerned about him, and I understand. I'm going to give you something to make you feel better, Robert, and everyone listening.
I would love that.
Jeffrey Simmons was the 36th best D tackle last year, according to PFF. He's a good pass rusher. How good? He is equal, Robert, equal to Andrew Billings' pass rush grade. So, no, again, I like Jeffrey Simmons more than Andrew Billings. I'm not trying to say that. But Andrew Billings was 42nd. Jeffrey Simmons was 36th. Jeffrey Simmons being the top 5 Chris Jones type D tackle, I don't think he's at that level, but I think he is good. But that whole defensive line, we talked about this. Harold Landry's a run stopping D end. He's a name, but he hasn't lived up to the billing. Arden Key, solid pass rusher. Maybe you put him in the Walker range in terms of solidness. Devondre Sweat, huge guy down there by Robert from Texas. He's a run stopper. He's a rookie. I that doesn't scare me. They signed Kenneth Murray, who's been a bad linebacker. Ernest Jones is coming over, has to learn the defense. Jack Gibbons is like a solid 2 down linebacker, and then you get to the DBs, which I was concerned about signing Jalen Johnson. Right? Do you remember why I was concerned, Robert?
Yeah, because you thought he was going to make 24 million a year.
And
Also because corners fade.
yes, okay, perfect. So Legarius Sneed has already started the fade. Chidobe Awuzie has already started the fade. Let me tell you how. Sneed was the 30th best corner last year after being 13th the year before. He's 27. That 26, 27 is right when that happens, y'all. Awuzie was 72nd last year. Roger McCreary, he's solid to below average
He's
nickel
a good ball
corner.
player, but being terrified of the opposing nickel corner is, don't get me wrong, that can get you in trouble blowing him off. But on the other hand, I'm right there with you where to me, Nick, what I'll always go back to is Namdi Asamoah, if you can remember that name.
Oh
Uh,
my gosh.
I know.
He playing boundary corner with the Raiders, and then the Eagles try to make him do something else, and he was just fell apart.
Yep. And I'll always remember, look, it's not literally the data because the data, like you're talking about, is way more straightforward. Corners
Mhm.
get about 4 to 6 years max on
Yep.
top of their game before they lose a step and they fade a little bit. But the way I always see it is, Nick, usually corners tend, in my experience, to go get that bag on a team that did not make their name. And then they never play great football there. I mean,
Yep.
again, it's just my experience. But when I look at Legarius Sneed, it's specifically Sneed that I'm looking at, but with the other corner whose name I'll be honest with you, I don't know. I probably should.
Awuzie,
Where does he come from?
he was at Cincinnati before,
Oh shoot! So he's just a guy that the coach knows. In that
but
case,
he's also 29.
right? I mean, this is where a lot of, and I think Jalen is probably going to start fading, probably middle of this year. if I had to guess, right? If I had to put a number on it, Nick, I think that Jalen is going to begin to decay sometime this year. But that's fine. I mean, if you've got 2 years of one half season of a great corner, another half season of a very good corner, another
Mhm.
season of a very good corner that decays into a good corner, and then you get one more season of good corner before you
Yep.
release him, good deal. Good deal all around. Everybody
Yep.
shakes hands, right?
Mhm.
But with Sneed and with Sweat and with the rest, or yeah, with Sweat and, well, yeah, it is Sneed and the rest of this Titans team, I feel like people are betting on the corners locking guys up. And I don't know if they're those guys.
Well,
Pesky, sure.
did
But
did you did you hear what their DC wants to do?
what?
He wants to be physical and press. And in my mind, good luck trying to press Keenan Allen. I know he's not as quick as he used to be, but he's crafty. Good luck doing that with DJ Moore, and good luck doing it with Roma Dunze. So to
What?
me, like if we're looking for this breakout game, week one, this is where I think Caleb can go for 300 the first game. Because if you're going to press, you're going to have big over the top because you got Diggs behind, who's not that good anymore. Jamal Adams, who's fallen off. Like this is where Hooker is solid. He's like the 40th, 50th best safety. There's going to be opportunities for chunks, Robert.
For anybody who can't see my face right now, I probably look pretty sullen. And that's because that is the stupidest game plan that I think I could possibly envision. Look, for anybody who's wondering where my head is at, if you're going to press, you just make the reads a lot easier for Caleb. You
Mhm.
want to you want to fry Caleb Williams, put the dude in a zone match blender. Beat him with athleticism from your linebackers, from your corners, and squeeze windows and confuse the kid because he hasn't seen NFL looks. If your plan is to line up across from DJ Moore and just beat him, okay, maybe you will on a couple of downs, but you make the read a lot easier for Caleb. Win, loss. Same thing he did at USC. Right,
Yep.
Nick? I mean,
Yep. Well, you're not going to win against three very good NFL wide
and
receivers.
I agree with you, but I'm not even getting there. Like, let's back up. High school quarterbacks can read win loss on press.
Oh
Like,
yeah.
it's just not complicated. And especially because, dude, all the looks for press are the same. It's always two high press, one high press. There's only so many things you're gonna
Right.
do out of it.
Mhm.
So part of me looks and it's like if Tennessee decides to play their game and basically makes life easy for Caleb, then Caleb has an opportunity to show a disgusting amount of talent that would lead Nick to that cinematic 300-yard game that then
Yep.
the whole NFL world is just going to freak out about, and it's not going to be sustainable because no most other defenses just aren't going to do that. In
Right.
Houston, D'Amico Ryans is probably going to call a very smart game, and if Caleb goes for, let's say, 300 yards, 2 scores, and a running score, then I bet you D'Amico will put him in a blender. Just because that's the way that the NFL tends to work. You're up,
Right.
then you're down. But it's more to say, Nick, that man, that is that is
Yep.
the most exciting thing I think I could have heard. I was already excited about the Bears defense against the Titans offense, but if their plan is seriously to say, "Hey rookie, beat us with your arm." I'm like, "Oh my goodness, have you not watched this kid's tape? Are you
Well,
out of your mind?"
the other thing, what happened in preseason when it was two man? Then he ran, or you can extend and then you just lose him.
Man,
That,
Nick, if Jeffrey Simmons comes free down the pipe and Caleb Williams gets out of the way and burns him, that comment Simmons made a couple weeks ago is going to be so funny to play
yep.
back again.
Yep.
We'll
Yeah.
see.
So I think that's another part of this too. But we got to go predictions, Robert here.
Hmm.
Okay. Um, I'll go first. I have
Go ahead.
Chicago winning the game. And I had said this last week and you didn't like it. I think it's rather easy. I think Caleb can go, I mean, I'll say 275 easy, but I think he could go 300. It could be a big game for him. I think they lean into that more, especially with, exposing, the physical corners. I think Levis could throw up a lot of passing yards being down, but I think he turns the ball over twice. I think Chicago wins by 10.
I love that prediction. I'm going to go with Chicago wins 21-17. I think it's a low scoring game that then as the Bears rep it out, they end up I don't know if they're going to get cheap points or free points. That's really my question is I think the Bears collect 2 defensive turnovers, and the question is whether the defense scores outright or whether the defense puts them at the 30 and then the offense drives it home. But I think it's an assisted 21 points, if that makes sense. And so lower scoring volume, Nick, than I think you'd like, but a win. And that's what counts.
Yeah.
I don't know.
The
I
the
will
the
bet
point
low.
totals the point total is 45. Does that change your mind?
It doesn't change my mind because
So
I think that for some
Robert's betting the under. Okay.
I'm, life's supposedly too short to bet the under, but everybody ends up, so many teams end up under, especially when you're
Yeah.
talking about a head coach in his first start with a second year quarterback in his first week 1 start and a first year quarterback in his first start. I think that the ingredients are there for a messy game on offense, but the Bears defense has the potential to nearly shut out the Titans, save a couple of plays that just get away from them. Whereas I think that the Titans defense is going to show up to the game thinking that they're all that, right? Why wouldn't they? And they may find out the hard way that the Bears can play some ball too. And
Mhm.
all the Bears offense I think has to do is stalemate. Like final thought on this is I think all the Bears have to do is push on offense and let the defense outright win the game for them. And that's a very easy game plan. Interestingly enough, if I had to pick one man who I think is at the helm of this victory, it's Matt Eberflus. I think Eberflus's ability to scheme and potentially destroy Will Levis's poor second year brain is going to determine whether or
Yep.
not this Bears team and season, and frankly, Eberflus's tenure is going to be the one Hard Knocks described or something else. And
Mhm.
so we'll find out together.
Yeah.
But that's what I think. What about you?
Yeah. Well, my final thought is this. So Keenan Allen's press conference today, he talked about some of the things that they're working on. And the main thing that with Caleb is again, his confidence is very high, but they've just been talking about hey, I'm just gonna get the ball out quick to you guys. And that's what it should be like. Like we've talked about, be that point guard. And so if he can do that, I just see so many matchups that are in Chicago's favor. Like Kyler Gordon is more athletic and I think ready to shut down Tyler Boyd. And then Jalen Johnson against whoever is over there. And then you can shade the safety the other way. Then you got your 2 linebackers in the middle. So like I just see so many things that are in the way. And even our D line is better than their O line. So to me, I do think that. So if I go by 10, Robert, I might go. I'll stretch it. I'll say 28-17. How about that? I'll go one more touchdown higher than you.
Ooh, I mean, hey, I think that that would be an unbelievably fun football game, especially if you really get. I keep thinking about the season in terms of Rappaport tweets, if you can believe it. Like Caleb Williams, 300 yards, shocks the NFL, or something like that, where
Mhm.
I think this could be a season where excitement gets spun up very fast. And so it all starts to me with the Titans win. We're running out of things to say about it
Yeah.
because we've been talking about this
Well,
game for a long time.
I mean, they talk about this. New head coaches tend to not do well. Teams with new coordinators don't do well. So Chicago has new coordinators. Technically, Flus being with the defense makes that defense, I think, play faster as they know the system. New players, both teams have a lot of new players. When all of that is going on, you would favor the one that has more steadiness with their coaching staff,
Yes,
and also the team that is at home.
the focus for most is, well, how's the Bears offense going to score? And I'm like, why is the Titans offense going to just congeal so much faster than the Bears offense? Yes,
Mhm.
they have a rookie quarterback. Their quarterback doesn't have 10 starts under his belt, if memory serves. So it's not as if Will Levis is exactly experienced in the wide world of the NFL. There's
30th, 30th in PFF ranking last year among quarterbacks. Will
right.
Levis.
Not good. So then what do you end up with, Nick? Well, you end up with a you end up with a Titans offensive line that is strong at literally all of the wrong places to stop the only Bears pass rusher worth a darn. You
Yep.
end up with one unit of the 4 major units within this game that has any veterancy whatsoever, and it's Chicago's because the Titans are doing something completely different with completely different players. So I don't know, man. I just see the Titans as a very unfinished product that I wish the best of luck in their division because they could easily end up really solid in that division. But week 1, I don't know, man. I
Well,
can't help but think I really don't want to predict this all the time, but I can't help but think of all of the games that we've start the season with. This reads to me like the most likely for Kyler, uh, TJ, or Tremaine to pick a pass off and take it to the house. And so,
Mm,
especially if your defense scores for you, you gotta think the Bears have the edge.
yeah. Well, especially Sweat, I guess Nicholas Petit Frere, who's been not very good. The
Short
other thing,
arms, slow feet, the
yeah,
wrong matchup for
yep.
somebody like Sweat.
And the other thing to think about, and it's going to be very interesting, is one of the issues with Cincinnati's offense has been lack of motion. And we know motion is something that helps produce first downs, yardage, and points. And so it'll be interesting to see because I know Joe Burrow doesn't prefer that. And Joe Burrow likes shotgun. If it's going to be under center, Will Levis, if it's going to be gun, is it going to be much motion or not? That's going to be something interesting to kind of just watch. Because if they go gun and they're pretty still, I mean, you're asking for a Bears just whooping on that offense.
We'll see. Okay. You got any final thoughts before we wrap up?
Well, last thing, we don't do this very often, y'all. I'm sure you are. You should follow Robert on Twitter, Robert K. Schmitz. I am at _ Nick Whalen. Robert, you're going to be streaming tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then I have my football guys article coming out. So I'll be doing DFS rankings in terms of the FanDuel and DraftKings, my positional rankings, what I like this week in terms of value. I always go with values, y'all, because everything's about value. And then I have my contrarian article coming out on it'll be Saturday.
Perfect. Also, we've been loving the pumpkin emotes. I need to see more pumpkin emojis. The pumpkin emoji is the semi-official emoji. I want to know. I want to know how many pumpkin emojis you're gonna drop in a big Bears victory.
Well,
Everybody.
how about score predictions and pumpkin emojis?
Score prediction? Pumpkin emoji. There
Yes,
it
I like it.
is.
I like it.
Thank you guys so much for listening. Give us a review if you haven't already. I got to run to a meeting, but thank you so much for checking this out. Bear down. Thanks so much for bearing with us.